if you look at the whole life of the planet, zombie movies have only been around for a few blinks of an eye. So if the reviews wipe them all out, that is a return to normality. Let's talk about 28 Days Later.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Out of the Storm podcast. So, today, Daniel, please let the people know what we are going to be discussing or debating.
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we are talking about the 2002 post-apocalyptic horror classic 28 Days Later, which I have seen a whole bunch of times, and I think Jonathan, you have as well, and Herbie, you just saw for the first time. Just to quickly recap what 28 Days Later is about. The movie starts with animal rights activists breaking into a lab and freeing test monkeys that have been infected with a rage virus, which then go on to infect people with that virus, which turns them into a kind of zombie. The story then picks up with a guy who wakes up in the hospital. He's been in a coma for 28 days. And he wakes up to a world that has essentially collapsed because of the zombie outbreak. And the story follows him as he finds other survivors and tries to find a way to survive. Hervé, since you just saw the movie for the first time, what's your takeaway on 28 Days Later?
I thought it was perfectly fine movie. It was a good watch. Nothing that I hadn't seen before in other, zombie movies or TV series, including The Walking Dead. But I thought it was fine. The characters were enjoyable enough. Took me by surprise actually at first, the quality of the movie and how low quality it was. It looked like it was shot on just any old digital camcorder that they had back in the day. So that one kind of threw me for a loop when I first tuned into the movie. But you quickly kind of become used to it. I wouldn't say I fell in love with the characters, but I was very much on board with the journey that they were going through. I will say the end was a bit disappointing because you have Jim, who turns into a bit of an action star towards the end, where he never really showed those capabilities. And at that, against the army, so people who are actually trained to fight. So it kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop, and I wasn't really best pleased with how it ended. But I think everything before that was quite compelling. I think it was all, reasonably well done.
We can pick up the ending in a little bit, because it definitely doesn't have the same kind of ending that most zombie movies have. Just to quickly talk about the quality, the reason this looks the way it does is because it was shot on digital as was available in 2003, because it was shot for a relatively low budget of $8 million at the time. So yeah, it does look a little bit like a home movie in some places, right? But I think that does add a little bit to its believability as well, right? Because the entire project here is to make zombies believable. And the question is, did it do that for you? Did you believe this was really happening, this was real? Or is this like any other zombie movie where you kind of turn your brain off a little bit in terms of making it believable?
I wouldn't say that I believe this more than any other zombie movie, I would say. But I mean, to touch on the camera quality, I think I definitely felt it, especially at the start when they're showing him walking through London on his own. And they're doing some of these like wide shots of the city and him sort of walking from the hospital, etc. I did feel the low camera quality there. But once we got a little bit more focused on the characters and once we got a little bit more focused on their story, it was definitely less noticeable. In terms of like the world itself and the feeling of it, and I don't know whether it's because we're from London and I know the places and you can kind of recognize certain things in the movie, that it felt more real in that sense. But I wouldn't say the quality of the movie made the zombies feel more real to me.
Yeah, I think like things like shaky cam and extreme close-ups and very hectic action sequences, I think are way overdone now. But I think back in 2002, like that was a bit more innovative, right? Where fights are very chaotic and you don't really see what's going on and you see everything very up close. And I think in a situation where you've got regular people just trying to survive against these rabid monsters, I think that fits there. And then making it look a little bit like a home movie supports that effect, I think.
Didn't they introduce the whole like fast-raged infected?
Yeah, so the big impact that this movie had was that it basically, as far as I know, invented fast zombies. Because before this, zombies were the slow shamblers that we know from The Walking Dead and like classic zombie movies. And this was the fast rage zombies who were like scientific zombies, right? They're not caused by some kind of curse. Or like in Day of the Dead, like hell is full, and so the dead walk the earth and stuff like that. Like these are people who are infected, and they're never called zombies in the movie. And them being fast and aggressive and just charging at people and never stopping. That's a zombie archetype now. Now, whenever you make a zombie anything, book, game, movie, whatever, the big question you have to answer is, are your zombies fast or slow? And that completely changes the kind of tone, and it kind of sets the basic foundation of your zombie story, right? This movie basically popularized the fast zombies that just run at you and never stop.
For me, who is someone that only knows fast zombies in modern media, it's difficult to know how, and not to get too sidetracked from this movie, even though it's related, because they kind of pioneer the fast zombies, but it's difficult to try and imagine how slow zombies or just like walking zombies would have had any tension. And maybe you have some good examples of, where it was done well, but it's hard to imagine not surviving if the zombies are slow when you can just simply outrun them. So for me anyways, for the mindset that I have, or the knowledge that I have on zombies, it's definitely a welcome addition, and something that ups the stakes and ups sort of the ante of those zombie encounters in the movies, because it just adds a lot more pressure to what they're doing. So in this movie, they have the scene where they're trying to change the tire, which was not as believable as other aspects of this, but they were trying to change the car, and then they just all kind of decide to use their strength to lift the car while the little girl changes the tire on the car. But when you have the pressure of the zombies running at you, it adds that sense of urgency, which I feel is definitely needed, not just in this movie, but in all the zombie mediums.
Just in terms of slow zombies, aren't the Walking Dead zombies slow?
I was going to say The Walking Dead, and I think with The Walking Dead, and I was going to say it is 28 Days Later is smart that they actually did use fast zombies, because with The Walking Dead, the reason why the slow zombies worked is because the zombies came in packs. So even though they were slow, they filled up the space. As in, like, it would be virtually impossible for you to outrun it because there's just so many of them. So whereas with 28 Days Later, it was like, okay, they would have needed, if they were to do slow zombies, it wouldn't have worked because it just would have looked bad in general. Like, it wouldn't have been as atmospheric and as gripping as well. So I think with this one is like, okay, what can we do instead of slow zombies? Because I'm pretty sure they had the budget as well. So what can we do instead of slow zombies to kind of like fill the space? Fast zombies. So I'll say that's definitely a smart way of filling the space and getting your attention.
Yeah, and also it works better with the idea of this is as realistic as possible, and these are people who are infected with a virus that is basically just turning them into killing machines instead of being reanimated corpses. It's not quite the same thing, right? And throughout the movie, the aggression is really the defining feature for the fast zombies, whereas with the slow zombies, it's more about attrition. One zombie is not dangerous. You can always outrun it. You can always kill it, but it will never stop coming, and there will always be more, and they will never get tired, and eventually you will get tired, and then they will catch up to you, right? Like, that is the terror of zombies, right? That you just will never get a break. And here it's a little bit different, where the encounters are over very quickly, right? They just run at you, and you either defeat them or they defeat you. But there isn't really the siege mentality that you have in a lot of zombie media. You mentioned something else earlier, which is that we all live in London. And I watched this movie before I moved to London many years ago, and have not really seen it since then. But then COVID happened, and I kept getting reminded of 28 Days Later specifically because of the opening sequence of this movie, but also just disaster movies in general. So the first 5 minutes or so, where Jim is kind of wandering around the empty London and trying just to find somebody, and it's completely empty. That was basically my commute for 6 months, because I would go into an empty city, and there would actually be newspapers like in the office kitchen talking about lockdowns and stuff like that, right? So it was exactly like out of a zombie movie, which I always found kind of funny. And it reminded me of that kind of movie. And apparently this movie really got popular again during the pandemic as well. And I think that really speaks to how plausible a lot of the little details are.
I could definitely see for how, like, for us being from London, how it made it more entertaining watch, especially during the COVID period. I actually didn't think of watching it during the COVID period, even though I watched a lot of dystopian and zombie apocalyptic movies and TV shows. For someone from London, I could definitely see, I'm from London, so for me it was more gripping, because obviously just like the whole desolate portrayal. And, it just kind of gave a more sense of dread in comparison to any other zombie movies and shows that I've seen. because I'm from London. So I recognize a lot of the places that were, that were being shown. So at first, I'll be honest with you, I think I watched the first 10 minutes and I took it off. And then this was a long time ago. And then I came back to it another time and then I appreciated it more because it was London. I kind of had to get past the awful quality and just actually focus on the story. And as you see in the locations how just isolated it was and how there was no one in the streets, I appreciated it more, as in I appreciated my experience, because I was like, damn, that's pretty cool.
And if anything, it felt more eerie watching it now as well, just because of how busy London is, and like there's literally something going on in every corner of London. So when he was like walking through, I was like, surely like you would see someone else or like hear someone or something, and it just made it feel a little bit more eerie as to, okay, what's actually going on, and sort of where is everyone, and why aren't even the zombies kind of reacting to the noise that he's making in this. Yeah, looking at it from that lens, I was just like, damn, like something bad really happened to London to completely like shut it down, to completely, wipe out everything and everyone that was operating in the city, again, just because of how densely populated it is and how busy everything is in London, especially in some of the locations that he was in this movie as well.
Harvey mentioned this part about the tunnel and them changing the tires. That was actually my favorite scene. Actually, not to be fair, each of them, and I get why you might not have liked that. But for me, that was one of my favorite scenes because I've always had that phobia of being trapped in a tunnel. I don't know what the reason could be. Maybe it's stuck in traffic or just something. I've always just had that kind of like phobia. Something crazy would happen in a tunnel. God forbid it'll collapse, God forbid, or whatever. So being stuck in a tunnel, and the reason why you're stuck in the tunnel is because there's a zombie apocalypse, is what that scene there, that made me feel, I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but that had me tense.
Yeah, the problem is that otherwise they behave pretty reasonably, right? Throughout the rest of the movie, they're pretty responsible and cautious, and they don't take unnecessary risks. And here they drive into the tunnel when they outright say that there are other alternatives. And then Frank just drives over this barricade, and surprise, surprise, he gets a flat tire. Why would you be in the frame of mind? It's not like they've had a couple of successes and they're getting cocky or something. No, like it's a completely unnecessary risk. I think that was the one time in the movie where I actually thought, no, this makes no sense. This is just purely for the drama.
What else could they have driven, though?
Could have gone over a bridge. There's many ways to get across the river.
But who was... Oh, wait, they were all English. Yeah, they were all English.
Yeah.
But my point was that they just don't know their way around London. That's
no, but like they're all locals, right? They all know the way. And even if you don't, you can just look and see the bridges. Right, like it's not difficult. There are many options, and Jim outright says, how about we don't go through the tunnel? How about we go where it's not in an enclosed space and where it's not dark, right? So there's the one scene where I think they just did it for the drama. Pretty much every other scene, it kind of makes sense. Even when like Frank has his moment of frustration and gets infected as a result because there's a corpse like somewhere above him and a drop of blood conveniently falls into his eye. Even that can still happen. The sequence of events still makes sense. The tunnel scene is just a one big exception. In this movie, like the big objective is realism. Make the zombie outbreak, make the infection believable, make people's behavior and reactions believable, make the collapse believable. And I think the movie succeeds 95% of the time, except in this one place. You could imagine something like where he's not sure about the fuel, or he basically is impatient because he just wants to get out of the city or something, and he doesn't want to be in the city any longer than he needs to, and therefore he's taking that risk, and then it doesn't pay off. Like all of that is possible, right? But I don't remember anything happening where it's justified. It just happens.
My whole time even like thinking about them, or when they were about to drive through the tunnel, was surely there'll be cars blocking the way. Because if there's been this event that's completely wiped out everyone in London, surely there would have been a scenario where there were cars in the tunnel as well. And there were cars in there, and obviously there was like some type of blockade. But it was a bit implausible the way that he kind of just like drove over all of that as well, which kind of again took me out of the movie a little bit. And I get they just kind of wanted to throw in something there that was like a little bit cooler and a little bit actiony. But it just didn't work completely for this movie, which is unfortunate.
So this whole theme of making it believable and making it plausible, I think ties into something else which I really appreciate about this movie, which is that it's probably the least cynical zombie movie I've seen. Leaving aside outright comedies or satires or something, like this is by far the most optimistic zombie movie that I think I've ever seen. So specifically, not everybody is a sociopath in this. Like people are careful, but they help each other and they trust each other. Like specifically, Selena believes that like there's no rebuilding, it's all over. But other characters disagree, and they have conversations about this, and they both have a valid point, right? You don't get raiders. You like the soldiers end up being hostile, but broadly, characters are not just pure evil for the sake of it, right? Because because it's a genre convention. I kind of appreciated that about this movie, because that is something that bothers me about other zombie movies, where it's just so pessimistic and so cynical that, of course, at the slightest opportunity, people will become nasty and exploit each other and abuse each other and throw each other under the bus and stuff like that. I don't think that's realistic. I think it's much more of a mix. Like in any disaster in the real world, you have people doing that, but you also have people helping each other, right? And communities helping each other to get through a crisis. And we see this very rarely in zombie movies. And if we do see a community, like especially in stuff like The Walking Dead, there's something sinister going on, like the leader is actually a tyrant, or it's actually a cult, or they're cannibals, or you know what I mean? Like anything positive is always a lie. And here it's not, right? Like Frank and Hannah are just people, right? He's a taxi driver. She was in school a week ago, like 4 weeks ago. They're just regular people trying to survive, and they are careful, but they want to help each other and help others. I think that's refreshing.
I think it was summed up quite well in the whole scene where they're sort of talking about, I think it was like Selena and Jim, and they were saying about how the taxi driver and his daughter needed Selena and Jim more than Selena and Jim needed them. And it's a bit of a trade-off. So, whilst they're not being hostile to each other, they're in a situation where they are trying to survive at all costs. And it, like you said, it's not being nasty to them. It's not being cynical to the taxi driver and his daughter. It's just a case of they can come along, but in a matter of survival, I will pick myself first. And I think that's normal. I think that's human instincts. Even with the soldiers as well. Like you said, that they were having conversations about how the world can be rebuilt. And of course, the leader had a little bit more of a perverse way of trying to do things, where we're sort of trying to lure a woman in so that they can, try to rebuild the population. But you can kind of half understand it. Obviously, his methods of doing it were wrong, but you can kind of half understand the idea of, okay, we can't just survive because, the zombies are going to outlast us. How do we help humanity continue moving forward? Well, in England anyways, because it seemed to be like an isolated incident in the UK. And I think they mentioned about cases in France and New York, but it seemed like the rest of the world was unaffected. But I was actually, it's funny, I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned that as well, because I was waiting for that moment for the arsehole character to turn up in the movie. And I thought at first, when they sort of first interact with the father and his daughter, I thought that was going to be the moment, especially when she had them locked outside until, she got her father's approval. But again, that just kind of speaks to survival. And it's like, do we really need you? Is it really safe? Is it can we trust you? But once you kind of like go past that ground, there isn't this underlying tone of something sadistic waiting to happen between them. It's just, normal human interactions of how much do we need each other? How can you help me and how can we help you? Or not how can we help you, but how can we trade off our resources and how can we trade off, our skill sets?
I mean, in just about any other zombie movie, what was it? Frank gets them something to drink, right? He breaks out the fancy alcohol, right? Just to celebrate the occasion that they find that they've met somebody else who is alive. In any other zombie movie, that would have been poisoned, and they would have been fed to the zombies, like woken up being fed to zombies or something. And that doesn't happen. The guy is just happy to see somebody who is alive. I think you said something about the zombies will outlast us, but actually in this movie, it's the other way around. In any other zombie movie, it is about like this losing battle, right? Like Walking Dead specifically, I think everybody is infected. Is that right? Or am I confusing my franchises here? But like there are zombie versions where it's just rigged from the start to be pointless. Everybody will turn into a zombie at some point, or there is simply you can't run forever, that kind of thing. Like there's no rebuilding, right? And here it's the other way around. Like the zombies, because they're alive, have a limited lifespan, right? And we see this after 8 weeks, right? They are in fact starving. Anybody who is still alive at that point has outlasted the crisis and has a chance at rebuilding and can now rebuild. The movie basically ends with the end of the zombie crisis, right? Because these zombies are not sustainable. West says at one point where they've got this zombie, like one of their squad gets infected, and so they chain him up to study the progression of the disease. And he says at one point, like Jim asks him, "Have you learned anything from him?" And West says, "One thing I've learned is that he will never build anything. He will never grow crops. He will never have children. He will never build a house." Right? Like this is purely destructive. And people are constructive. People build things. They build communities, they build houses, they invent technologies, and the zombies do nothing of that. I think that is one of the really big themes here, is that you can actually, in fact, build something. You can, in fact, make things better. And the zombies or the crisis is a problem to be survived, and it's a stress test, but it's not the end of the world. And that is why it ends with them being discovered, and we see that help is coming.
I liked the change in Selina's character as well, when we're kind of like talking about surviving and, you know, building and, you know, having these connections, etc., where her character changed from, again, being quite cynical and being, you know, all about nothing really matters, everyone's going to die anyways, pretty much, to kind of building a strong bond with, it's almost like a new family that they had with the daughter and obviously the taxi driver that ended up dying in this, and Jim as well. And you can see that amidst having absolutely nothing and having everything kind of taken away, it's okay, a reminder of what's important. And, you know, what's important is, you know, the connections that we have, you know, the bonds that we're able to build between one another. And, you know, she becomes quite sincere in her actions to the people that she's traveling with, especially in the scene where, you know, they're about to, you know, be abused by the soldiers. And, you know, on her mind is, how can I protect, you know, this little girl's innocence, and how can I sort of try to make sure that she doesn't know or isn't affected by what's happened, because in that moment she's powerless to sort of to kind of do anything. They have all the guns, they have all, you know, the strength there, you know, kind of just like two women trying to put up a fight. And it's like, okay, what's the one thing I can do for her to try and protect her? So I think it was like great to see her development through the movie, and her rediscover the importance and what's important.
And I'm not even sure why Selina is so cynical, other than it's just her personality, because it seems like other people have lost more than she has, right? There's the scene where they are hiding in the kiosk, and her friend, what was it? I've forgotten the name now, but like the other guy who dies very quickly, he talks about how he was trying to evacuate on the trains, and he climbed over dying people to get to safety, and how messed up that is, right? And that is basically what it took to survive that day. He has much more reason to have lost all hope, right? And I'm not entirely sure. And maybe there's a scene where she explains what exactly she has lost. It sticks a little bit out that she's so cynical compared to everybody else, where everybody else is focused on survival and on finding, like trying to find what comes after, right? And she's just given up on it completely.
I was agreeing with everything you said until the point of giving up, because I think in terms of her personality, I think it was needed. Obviously, that kind of gave off a leadership role that was needed within the group. Because I think if she wasn't like that, then I don't know if they would have kind of like pushed on and survived. It was similar to, you know, in Quiet Place with Lupita's character, and then obviously you had the other guy. I think if Lupita wasn't the way that she was, cynical as well, and kind of like standoffish, and just wanted to kind of like just motivate towards her goal and just motivate to continuously be on the move, I don't think they would have got anywhere if they were just relying on, you know, the other guy that was pretty much in shambles. So I think their group kind of needed her personality in a way, even though she was off-putting, and it kind of does seem like, it seemed like she did want to be by herself but didn't at the same time. But I just think she was like, it was like tough love, and that in that tough love there was direction. So I think she needed to be there.
It definitely creates the right dynamic, right? Where she pushes forward and he wants answers, and she's just entirely focused on survival and staying one step ahead of the infected, and Jim tries to look at like the broader picture a little bit. So I know I'm like, that dynamic is absolutely right for the story. It's more like, it wasn't entirely clear to me just why she was in that place, right? Why that was her reaction.
It's like we probably needed a little bit more on her story, a little bit more on, like, you know, why she had this perception. And it could have been something to do with how maybe she, like, even before the apocalypse, how she maybe felt abandoned, or how she felt disconnected from society, or in some type of way. And then when all hope was gone, is that how she kind of found herself reconnecting with people and sort of finding value in time. It's something along the lines of, without kind of like rewriting the movie for them, but they just could have put something a little bit in there just to help contextualize the character a little bit better.
Yeah, it just didn't seem to be like a function of a character arc or something like that. One other thing that I really liked about this movie is how deliberate the scenery is in a lot of places. So did you guys pick up on how a lot of the time shots are framed where either in the foreground or the background there's some piece of civilization? So when they go to Jim's parents' house, there's like an electric pole just in the foreground, and all the wires go to the different houses. And that is all useless now. And then there's other examples where the highways that are now completely empty and are just slabs of concrete, right? So like whenever characters are going somewhere or arriving somewhere, there's something in the background that reminds us of like how things used to be. For example, when they rest in the ruins. So that is also civilization, but even older. So that again is like something that's like a holdover from a bygone era, and that used to serve some kind of function and now it doesn't. And basically everything we know is in the process of turning into that. And then it's like one after the other that is like that, where they never really talk about it, but most scenes have this in some way. Or there's like a scene where he arrives in the church. The shot is entirely focused on this giant wooden cross, and we just see him walking in the background. We see it like twice at least. And that has something to do with like institutions that no longer exist and that are not providing any help to anybody in this particular case, right? So, but it's like something from the past that people used to trust in. It's just at least 10 times where they frame things in such a way where the characters are kind of walking through kind of the empty shell of civilization. It's never really spoken about, right? It's never really explained.
But what do you think it's trying to say? Because if you because I didn't pick up on it on first watch, but what do you think it's trying to say, apart from obviously, kind of being remnants of bygone times, but what's the sort of the purpose of it within the themes?
One place that zombie movies can go is that like a lot of zombie movies are kind of about consumerism, and that's why a lot of them take place in shopping malls, and that is why a lot of the time there's like at least a sequence where characters go on shopping sprees, right? They just grab all the stuff they could never afford in their normal lives and that they spent years pursuing and never quite got there and stuff like that. That was missing here, right? Like they raid a supermarket, but that's because they need food. And actually at one point, Frank admonishes Jim because he's going for something inefficient, right? They're talking about, okay, we need sources of protein and we need stuff we don't need to cook. We need to, we need medicine, whatever, right? And they are being sensible about it, but there's no scene where they like there's no satire of consumerism or something like that in this, right? A lot of the movie is about building things and building, like living for tomorrow, and here we have things that have been built and they have kind of just fallen by the wayside and nobody cares about them anymore because there's no purpose to them anymore. And so this is kind of what has been lost, and that is what you could regain by rebuilding. I think if in a story where people characters constantly talk about what comes after and how do we survive and how do we rebuild, like this is a reminder of what needs to be rebuilt.
And can you loosely tie it to the idea of, and because again, like this felt like the biggest thing that I got from the movie was the reiteration of what's important. I know I mentioned it before, but you've got all of these things that were useful in a time that we felt were important, that we felt sort of we needed. But again, once you strip away everything and once all of that becomes obsolete, what is the thing that's most important to people? And its connection. And the reason that they go on this journey across town is for the connection to other people. Even obviously it's tied to safety and survival, etc., but it's that community. It's sort of connected with other people. And then you have this group of people that you have the father and the father and daughter that are sending the signal through the balcony, trying to get anyone that they can to notice them and come and find them so that they can connect with them as well. And of course you've got Celine's character who was, cynical, but then found her connection with, with these people as well. So again, for me, that was like, the biggest thing that I took away from this movie. It almost feels like that can kind of tie into it of strip all of that away. What is important to us and what is important to to people, and it's just community and a sense of belonging, and it's finding your people.
And ultimately you need other people to survive, right? Like people are stronger together, right? Every time they find somebody and every time they make a connection with somebody, it makes them stronger, right? And the one time it blows up in their faces is with the soldiers who should be protecting them and who have set up this camp. And also the soldiers have set up camp in this in this old mansion, which is again like a holdover from a previous world, right? Like it's not just some random house, it's not a barrack, it's not a bunch of tents, it's like an old estate, right? In the countryside, which is, so they've kind of set themselves up as kind of a new nobility, right? Because they have the guns, right? And then it turns out that they are there to kind of exploit Selena and Hannah, but because Jim cares about them, they have somebody who can help them. It's not, and you mentioned earlier that Jim turns into a little bit of an action hero, and we can talk about that in a minute as well. I think there's something to that, but ultimately it's because they care about each other, they help each other, right? So like when Selena gives Hannah the Valium, it's not so much that doesn't protect her exactly, but it makes it less bad. And she basically says, yeah, like this will not kill you, this will just make you not care. People are looking out for each other and people are helping each other, and that is what lets them win in the end. And in the end, they have kind of formed a kind of family, right?
Yeah, you're right. So I just don't want to. I'm going to go back to your point, but what I want to say is like kind of going off what you're talking about the soldiers. Like every zombie film or every zombie TV series is always the soldiers that crack first when it comes to civilization collapsing. This is a recurring theme, which I don't have an issue with it. I enjoy it. I just wonder why. Like, is it just like a thing that an idea that everyone just jumped on, or is there like social commentary behind it, trying to say something about the army, as in like, even though they're supposed to protect us, what do you think they're trying to say about the army? Because I genuinely believe it's a thing where, because obviously it was an idea which was first done in whatever zombie films, and then other zombie movies just, kind of just did the same thing. They followed suit, but at the same time, it's like, it's getting a bit too much. Are they trying to actually tell us, like I said, is there social commentary behind this? Are they trying to tell us something about the army?
Obviously, it's about the government can't be trusted, people in authority can't be trusted. These people are in charge only because they have the guns and no other reason, right? They weren't elected or anything like that. And generally, authority is always like, there's like this counter culture vibe to a lot of the zombie genre, right? Where individuals can be good people, but groups of people and authority figures are always bad, right? It's the scientists, it's the military, it's the government, it's the village leader, the priest, whoever it is, right? They're always bad, and that kind of goes into the general cynicism of the genre. And here, I'm not entirely sure it really ties into that theme in the same way, because that cynicism is pretty much absent from this from the story, right? I think it's much more about, it gives them something to overcome, and it gives them something to contrast themselves against, because they could also exploit each other, and get away with it, but they don't, right? And that's the difference between them. How do we feel about the ending, right? Is Jim too much of an action hero? Is the sequence of events plausible about how they get away from the military camp?
For me, I was kind of rolling my eyes a little bit at it, because these are meant to be military trained soldiers, and they would go through kind of tactics, scenarios, etc., on how to deal with various levels of threats. And it just seemed like he was just able to kind of dispatch of them quite easily, and outsmart them and out tactics them quite easily. And it didn't sit right with me for whatever. It didn't seem like he had a unique set of strengths or a unique way of going about how to deal with the soldiers. And then you had this like one infected guy, which controversial decisions have a black man chained up amongst some of the
But
entire
he
cast.
wasn't the only one, right? If he had been the only one, I would be with you.
Chained up?
But like
Were there others?
there were at least, I think there were two of the other
I don't
soldiers
think
who were black as well.
Sorry, I don't think I saw the other two, but he kind of stuck out, and he was like the main one, so that's why I kind of took notice of him a little bit more. but just kind of get back on it. To have one infected with, not how easily they go down, but when you have guns, to have one or two kind of infected running around the house, you would feel like the soldiers would be able to deal with it. And it just, I don't know, it just kind of brought the movie down quite a bit for me, that whole last 15-20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, I think it's borderline. Like some of it, like one thing he does is he attracts other infected by like running this air raid siren. And it's been established that that loud noises attract them. That's how he kills at least some of them. right? So that's one thing he does. But yeah, then there's a few others he just takes in close combat, and it's maybe a bit much. I guess maybe a better ending would have been to him just kind of lure a bunch of infected to the compound and have them just overrun the place, right? And then he sneaks out with Hannah and Selena. I imagine that would have worked a little bit better. Like, I'm not even sure that that particular scene where he's been sent off to be executed, and he kind of sneaks away, and then in the evening he comes back and frees Selena and Hannah. Like, I'm not sure that the way that plays out really has that much of a thematic underpinning. But it's ultimately he just wins, right? It's not necessarily like a big growth moment for him. It's not paying off something that has happened earlier. It just, we need a hero, and he's it. Right? That's kind of my reading of it a little bit.
I think it needed to be light in a way, though, because I think it was already depressing for all the amount of people that were dropping. So it was like, okay, I don't know how. Actually, no, that's like, I was gonna say, I don't know how sensitive people were back in the day. I'm pretty sure they were less sensitive as they are now. So, but I think there were always going to be heroics in this type of genre. So it made sense in terms of like in the context of it being a zombie apocalypse film. And when it comes to how things usually pan out, there's always going to be like a Rambo moment. So it made sense in that aspect. However, I do see where you guys are coming from. It was kind of weird that he outmaneuvered, the elite fighters, elite soldiers. So that was a bit mad. However, you could see it as, when you are in desperate times, desperate measures, and when you're at the point of death. Because I think he was already, I'm pretty sure he was weak as hell, obviously, from everything that he went through. So him kind of luring zombies, which would have been a good idea, I just don't think he would have been able to outrun them. Because if they were Walking Dead zombies, which that's a tactic which they do a lot in Zombie Dead, they always lure zombies to, whoever, to the opposition. Whereas this one, I think it would have been really hard for him to do that, like for him to outrun the zombies. So I think that is a good tactic for slow zombies. For these zombies, that is suicide.
But then the actual ending I like quite a bit, where they basically they survived the escape from the military compound, and then they have kind of sheltered up in a little house in the countryside, essentially waiting it out. And they've secured food and everything else they need from surrounding villages, and they're kind of just waiting it out. And then they've spotted these recon flights where people are looking for survivors, and so they make these giant letters that spell out hello in cloth, right? In order to get their attention. I've got two observations about that. The first one is they finish the last letter as the jet arrives, right? So if the jet had arrived 10 minutes earlier, it would have just said hell. That's one observation I've got. The second one is that's actually more letters than help. So help, it would actually have been much easier to do than hello. But anyway, that's kind of just what went through my head in the last 2 minutes of the movie. But I think in general, like I really like the ending. It ends upbeat. It ends on hope. We see the point brought home again that the zombies are not taking over. They are, in fact, starving in the streets because they've run out of food, right? And simply being kind of responsible and careful will get you through the crisis, unless you get really unlucky, right? And that is what the three end up doing. I don't think there's another zombie story that has this idea of the zombie crisis is contained, right? Here, it's contained to Britain, right? Because it's an island. And initially there are reports about confirmed cases in Paris and New York. And that might not even be true. That might just be rumors. But if they are true, then that got contained, right? Because the rest of the world has not collapsed. It's just like if you are in Britain in that situation, that's bad news. But I kind of like the idea that the world is kind of watching and is kind of trying to figure out what to do about this. Clearly, they've decided that they're not just going to send in the army, right, to rescue people. They're kind of containing it, quarantining it, and kind of waiting it out. And now that things are winding down, they're looking for survivors. I don't think that is a dynamic I've seen in other zombie movies, right? It's always kind of the global collapse, or we don't talk about scale at all. So that's like another way in which this movie is kind of breaking the mold a little bit. It does inform the story, right? Because it's a contained crisis and it will be over, and you just have to make it to the other end.
And it'd be interesting to kind of see, I don't know if it is in the sequel, the outside world's view on what's going on, and to maybe expand the universe a little bit and see how the rest of the world is reacting to it, and what is being done about it. So I don't know if that is the sequel or if it's still kind of focused on what's going on in the UK.
Yeah, the sequel is very much about what happens after. Now the immediate crisis is over, and now we need to kind of rebuild. It's kind of what the sequel is about, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, in another conversation. But yeah, I think it does make this zombie story a little bit different. It also reminded me of this idea that I've had for a while, and I think I've mentioned this in previous conversations, which is that I would like to see more zombie stories that are not American centric, that take place in other environments and cultures and under different circumstances and assumptions, and just see what like, there are obviously zombie stories, but they tend to usually follow the American template, right? Like everything collapses, everybody's out for themselves, the place becomes lawless immediately, right? Like that's almost all zombie stories, including the ones that are not American. There are some, but I would like to see more, just more different perspectives, more different takes on what such a crisis would be like.
And it was actually interesting to see them take on the zombies without guns, because again, that's the normal template. That's the normal. Americans have guns. You kind of find your resources, but here you have to improvise. You have to sort of kind of go with what you have, whether it's like a long machete or whether it's like a baseball bat or whatever. It makes the threat a little bit more dangerous as well, because you can't just shoot them from a distance. I mean, I know we got there in the end with the army, but that's the army. But here it's the zombie has to get close enough to you for you to deal with the threat, and it just adds to the stakes and adds to the tension being built.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts on 28 Days Later?
No, solid movie. I don't know if it was Cillian Murphy, one of Cillian Murphy's first roles or something along the lines.
I think it was his first leading role. So they actually went out of their way to hire unknown actors for this. Christopher Eccleston I think is the most well known, but even in 2002 he wasn't a leading actor, I don't think. So
is that the father?
In the major. Yeah, you might have seen him as Doctor Who and a few other things. He and Cillian Murphy are the two that are really big that you've heard of. But they went out of their way to hire no-name actors that either had not done anything or were not big stars, because then it makes it more believable that these are normal people.
Anyway, well, it didn't completely work, because I know Cillian Murphy, and like I'm seeing this from the lens of
now we do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The digital video made it feel more raw, so I can appreciate it a bit more. It's not one of my best zombie films I've seen. However, it is definitely something that I would watch again, surprisingly. I think it's because it was based in London, so then you're right. Kind of like watching something that follows the American structure, and you know what I'm saying, is refreshing to see. And I think this was definitely refreshing to see that it was in London, because is there any zombie TV, like zombie apocalypse TV shows or movies that's based in England?
There's Dead Set. Have you seen that?
I've seen that. That was cool. It's not like a classic, but that was cool.
It's not that well known, but it's essentially from the point of view of Big Brother contestants who are in the Big Brother house as the zombies take over.
Yeah.
And they basically don't realize it for a while, and then they realize it, and then they're stuck in this artificial environment, and all the crews have gone home, and there's zombies everywhere, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, I've seen that one. I like that one. It's definitely not classic though, but I liked it. I watched it. I liked that one. But so like I said, it was nice watching something that was based in London.
I can kind of agree with Jonathan in that on initial watch, it didn't feel like it did anything too dissimilar to zombie movies that I'm typically used to, but that's without knowing the history, and that's without knowing the backstory behind it. From this discussion, again, we discussed about how it was the first movie to do fast zombies compared to slow walking zombies and things like that. So for its time and for what it introduced to the genre, I think it's massive. I think it's definitely groundbreaking in its own way, even though looking at it from the lens of 23 years later or 20 however many years later, it doesn't feel as innovative as it probably did at the time. So it's always good to have a little bit more knowledge, always good to have a little bit more insight as to the history behind certain fields and how it changed the landscape, especially when looking at some of these older films. So I can appreciate it for that. Like I said, at the start of this, I said it was, perfectly fine movie for me. I'll still go with that. I'll still say it's a perfectly fine movie. It's a really good watch. And yeah, I enjoyed my time with it. Nothing, really negative to say. Nothing too negative to say about it.
And that's, I think, the case with a lot of classics, is where once they've been influential enough, they are not that impressive because you've seen 20 copies of it, right? And this is kind of a bit similar, where like the virus-based zombies and the fast zombies and the rage zombies and vomiting blood everywhere, like that's pretty standard now in a lot of zombie stories. But this is where it started. But even beyond that, I think just the way it's constructed, how its characters are introduced and how it's paced, and the way, like, just what it tells us and how it gives it has to give a whole bunch of exposition at the start. But there's never like a scene where they find like a scientist and gives like a 5-minute speech about how it works, right? It's kind of pieced together from experience and observation, and on all of those different levels. I think it works really quite well. So I absolutely absolutely had a good time rewatching this after many years, and I could appreciate just how good it is and how tight the script is and how good the performance, especially Hannah's performance, is not amazing, right? Like, you can really tell that she's reading lines, but everybody else, I think, is really firing on all cylinders and really bringing these characters to life, I thought. And because it's also understated and so non-polished, that is what makes it feel more real. And I think that is what it was going for, and I think it achieves that. All right, shall we wrap it up?
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. We hope that you have enjoyed our discussion, and we hope that this will kind of give you that anticipation and readiness for the new 28 years later film.
If you've reached this part of the episode, thank you for tuning in with us. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard on this episode, tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought our discussion was absolutely revolting, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. We'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.